Hi, I'm Dr. Stu Hoffman, and what you're about to watch may have the greatest likelihood of changing the public perception about chiropractic now and forever. There is no scientific evidence, no epidemiological study, no biomechanical study that proves a causative link between a chiropractic adjustment and vertebral artery dissection. None. ChiroSecure and our partners have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars researching this issue. In fact, we hired one of the top research attorneys, and his conclusion is, and I'm quoting, while the weakest form of scientific evidence, case studies, establish an association between chiropractic adjustments and stroke, that association is common to 100 trivial movements that are part of everyday life. Yet, causation not only remains unproven, the inverse has been established. Biomechanical and epidemiological studies, the strongest form of scientific evidence, have not supported a causative relationship. From our own surveys of doctors in the field just like you, we know how important you think chiropractic research is. What you may not know is that ChiroSecure doesn't just fund our own research, but rather we fund research projects that have the potential to further document not only the efficacy of chiropractic for musculoskeletal pain, but also research that is more likely to show the value of removing subluxations and its effect on longevity and human performance. And now with what you are about to watch, and with your help, we are taking on the most important project yet. ChiroSecure has dedicated itself to make sure that if a patient alleges that a chiropractic adjustment has caused an arterial dissection, the most aggressive defense available based on research will be asserted on your behalf. And now for our show. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for being part of our show today. This is a special event for us. We've done a lot of risk management oriented programs for the chiropractors around the country. And today is a little bit different because today what we want to talk about is the stroke issue. And we've talked about it in various forms, including utilization of informed consent and how to utilize informed consent, why to utilize it, and how it should be written utilizing our professionally done form and process. But today is really about the perception, public perception through articles in the media, on TV, magazines. There's so much information that's been disseminated over the last few years on associating chiropractors and stroke. And being in the profession and having some incredible minds on this show today, we want to just cover that a little bit in terms of what we should really talk about with patients. So, you know, we want to think about, as the doctor, what do I say to a patient? Or how do I incorporate the research that we offer to you and future research that shows how little risk there is to a chiropractic adjustment? And there's so much statistics. Do we want to incorporate it? How much? What should we do? So let's start, just talking about the public perception. Bill Esteb, I'd love to ask you first, because you really, for 30 some odd years, have represented the patient point of view with your books, your seminars, and all of the consulting that you've done. When we talk about chiropractic and stroke, how do you see the public viewing this whole stroke issue related to chiropractic?
You know, Stu, I rarely hear of patients talking about stroke. They talk about something else that's somewhat related, but it rarely does the word stroke show up. You know, I think the whole stroke argument is largely the fodder used by professional anti-chiropractic groups in an attempt to undermine the profession more than it is the concern of a typical patient. I think most patients feel incredibly vulnerable when they do have their neck adjusted. And I think it's the vulnerability and the fear that is the real issue. And I'm not so sure that they are showing up with some type of dissection issue in their mind.
That's interesting, and what a great way to start the conversation, because I totally agree with you. My experience is that the public isn't as aware as we think that they are. But I'll tell you where it does come into play. And when I'm talking to doctors that have patient incidents in their office, it doesn't mean that someone went to the emergency room with symptoms of a dissection or anything like that, but a patient may get upset with the doctor. And the first thing that they do is they go on the internet and start searching all of the bad things chiropractors do. And that's when they start asking for money back because you conned me into getting this care I don't need and is risky, dangerous, and all of that. It's also when there are press releases of sorts that come out that this becomes heightened. So, you know, Dr. Clum, you've been part of that conversation with, you know, the American Heart Association article and numerous other pieces that have been out there. What do you see?
Well, thanks, Stu, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate with you and everyone today. You know, it's a vantage point issue. For us as practitioners, we look at the epidemiological data that's out there, and we know that there have been 3 very, very large studies that have been completed over the past 7-8 years, 2 within the last year, that have looked at the incidence of vertebral artery, and the largest of these studies involved 5% of the population of the United States. That's a massive number of people to be involved in this study. And their conclusion was that there is no association between cervical spine adjusting and vertebral artery injury. That study was the second iteration of a study that was done in 2008 by Cassidy in Canada that was published in Spine. And the third iteration of this came out of University of Pennsylvania. It was completed by medical doctors as opposed to chiropractors, and came to the same conclusion. So you've got one data set that says we're not associated with it, and you've got this lore that exists on the internet that says we are. And we all know that one of the serious questions in this whole thing is the idea of the dissection in progress when the patient presents for care. At that point, for most of these individuals, the die has been cast. And they're going to end up where they're going to end up, whether they go to the chiropractor, go to the medical doctor, or go to Starbucks. They're going to wind up where they wind up. And teasing out those people from this occurrence of this phenomenon is a critical element that's quite often lost on the public, and quite often lost, frankly, on the neurology community that wants to make a quick conclusion about, oh, of course, a cause over with, get out of this thing. Well, the reality is that, as Bill pointed out, we look at it from one viewpoint, that this is a very common routine thing we do, that is cervical spine adjusting, and we know the remarkable safety associated with it because we do it every single day, day in and day out, in comparison to the patient who only has it done a few times in their lifetime, or perhaps weekly or monthly or whatever the case. But let's assume somebody who's coming under care for the first time. They've never had this procedure done to them, and it's a unique thing in their life. So they look at it very differently and very cautiously. I'll use a personal example. I've had both of my knees replaced. The day of the surgery, the surgeon is talking very casually about what's going to go on, how this is going to go, and what the procedure is, and so on and so on. And it's very blasé, not unprofessional or not inappropriate in any way, but this was his experience. My experience was I've never had this done. And if everything goes well, I'm going to have this done once in my lifetime, and it's a big damn deal to me. So from his viewpoint, it was no big deal. You know, I do this all the time. This is shooting fish in a barrel. To me, it was a big deal. So to go back to Bill's point, that if we can encourage our colleagues to be a little bit more empathic, to be a little bit more aware of the caution and of the concern that they bring to that adjusting table that we simply don't have because of our experience. We have a level of professional caution and a professional safety issues that we're aware of, that's for sure. But we know how simple it can be to adjust the cervical spine, how comfortable it can be to adjust the cervical spine, and that it's not a big deal. But if you've never had it done before, that level of apprehension that's brought to it is something that perhaps as a community we need to pay significantly more attention to create a greater level of comfort and security for that person receiving that care for the first time.
Thank you. That was awesome. I really appreciate how your information dovetailed what Bill had to say when it comes to patients, especially new patients, their apprehension when it comes to getting their cervical spine adjusted. And I want to also point out that we're, talking about chiropractic and stroke, at some point we really have to clarify it is not a profession stroke, it's a procedure associated with a stroke, which would be the chiropractic adjustment, not the chiropractic profession. So maybe a little bit of semantics, but I think it's, if we're talking about communication, we need to start clearing that up. And Dr. Murkowski, you've testified on so many malpractice claims that have to do with vertebral artery dissection as well as others. And, you've seen a lot of different allegations and scenarios out there. What is the takeaway from your perspective for the doctor in their own office that, they'll come out once a year to go to a continuing education seminar or, to something here or something there, but they're not very involved and don't really get a lot of the information that a lot of us that are on the road and speaking at different events or participating may be privy to. What could be the takeaway for them from your experience in these claims that you work with?
Well, I think, I guess I have two main issues, and I'll address yours first. And again, thanks for letting me participate. No doctor, I don't care what the specialty is, can guarantee a procedure. So I think one of the main issues for your listeners are that they have to remember that it's not the procedure so much as everything that leads up to the procedure has to be documented properly. In other words, did you take time to talk to the patient? Patient communication, I know, is Mr. Esteb's specialty, and that's very important from my perspective when I look at these cases. How did the doctor communicate with the patient about the procedures that they're going to do? In other words, was there a good patient interview? Was there a good case history? Did you do the exam? Were there x-rays taken? And did you tell the patient, what to expect? It's like Dr. Clum said, to the patient, he or she may not know what's going on, and we do this every day. From the doctor's point of view, we have to be prepared to be a little more consistent, I think, with our explanation to the patient of why we do what we do in a careful manner. And that, the patients really don't care sometimes how much. We just want to know that we care. So the more caring that we can show from a practicing physician's point of view, the better off we're going to be. I will tell you a personal experience that just happened 2 weeks ago. I know many of you know that I recently have had a heart attack with quad bypass surgery, and I have to go to the hospital for cardiac rehab. So I'm on my treadmill in my cardiac rehab class. I have 2 ladies to my right, I have 3 gentlemen to my left, and I have 3 people in front of me. And the person in charge of rehab comes up to me and says, and this was just 2 weeks ago, that her husband used to play baseball with another gentleman in West Virginia, and his wife, who was 34 years old, went to a chiropractor in West Virginia, and got adjusted and stroked out on the table. And she goes, is this common, and how do you explain that? And then she said, what are the statistics? Now, that is out in the open. I basically have 8 other people listening. I'm on a treadmill, and believe me, I wasn't prepared for that question, until she said that. So then I told her that, the incident rate is much lower for what we do than where we are in the hospital for the quad bypass that every one of us had. It's lower than, of course, all the meds that we were taking after the quad bypass surgeries, and there was 8 other people there that had the same procedure. And again, I wanted to reassure them that I gave them a quick statistic, and I said there's many different authorities, but the most important thing is to give the doctor of chiropractic the opportunity to do everything that he or she does in a careful manner to show that this is really not going to, the incident is really not going to take place if they do what's going to be considered the standards of care and practice. And I reiterated, the history, the exam, the x-rays, the report, showing them or trying to show this person that asked me the question along with now the 8 people listening. And by this time, I've got 4 other people that have joined around my treadmill, wanted to hear this. So I think once the question's raised in a public setting, we have to be very cognizant of what is going on. We have to be, of course, these people, in most cases, none of these people have even been to a chiropractor. They're not having the procedure. They're just, making the inquiry. I will tell you the byproduct that took place is that after I did my explanation, I did have 3 other people call the office who became patients because they said that even though they were having these problems after the bypass surgery, they were willing to basically try chiropractic just because how I answered the question. So I think the doctor has to show he or she is concerned, and then we have to give the proper statistics, but then make all the procedures up to the procedure do exactly what we've learned in school and the forms that we've utilized. And I think the ChiroSecure company does an outstanding job with providing information and like the forms for informed consent. So I want to applaud you on that.
Thanks, Ken. And that was terrific because that's exactly what this show is about today. And, we started with Bill because he is a communications expert and someone that I look up to as a friend and a mentor as part of this profession, because he's as much a doctor as any chiropractor I know, and we'll get more into that communication, but that's exactly the type of situation that we're talking about, because even when Bill indicated, which I agree, he indicated that, you don't hear a lot from the patients, but, once it comes up, it comes up. And it's really about how do you address those issues at that moment in time, and kudos to you for doing a terrific job on that. So I want to bring in John, because John is our attorney, our legal expert when it comes to chiropractic being accused of a causation when it comes to these dissections that could lead to a stroke. And he spent the last 2 years researching everything that there is about chiropractic and strokes. I don't think that there's many people on the planet that now know more than John does. And John, we're coming from this today at a little bit different perspective than we usually talk about, how through ChiroSecure we get to defend our doctors on these allegations based on the information that you've helped to uncover and make more aware of. But what about the public? What do you see in terms of changing the conversation so that we can move off of the spot we're stuck in with the media controlling what is placed on us rather than what may be real? And thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hoffman. It is an honor to join this group. I was appreciative of the response just given in regard to the question posed I can't imagine having it posed during cardiac rehab. That is courage indeed to face that stress, additional stress at that time. The easiest way I have found in communicating the simple position, this position in the simplest terms, is really identifying the timeline. Plaintiffs and those patients under misconception who have initiated suit usually draw the following timeline: neck pain, chiropractic manipulation, VAD, and then stroke. What we have to do is pull back and explain to the general public and the patients indeed who pose these questions that retrospectively it's the vertebral arterial dissection that is first to occur. That is what retrospectively causes the neck pain, which then in turn leads to the visit to the chiropractor. And the evolution of the stroke, as we know by these various studies Dr. Clum referenced earlier, show that there's not causation. We just have a natural evolution, unfortunately, rare as it might be. But we've got to start the beginning point that the confusion generally in the public is that the manipulation causes the dissection. And we know from the science and the medicine that's just not the case. The innervation of the artery with nerves that cause the pain response is the triggering event leading these individuals to visit either their primary care or their chiropractic healthcare providers. And just, Dr. Clum, just to correct you on a small point, and I'm sensitive to this because my son went to the University of Pennsylvania, and he also often, they accused him of going to Penn State. The Pennsylvania study was indeed by physicians. Dr. Harbaugh, who is on our side in regard to the mission that we have. He's affiliated with Penn State. He did that third study you mentioned from Pennsylvania. And so we've got the Optum study, the Cassidy study, and this new Penn State study by Dr. Harbaugh, all reaching the same conclusion that there is no foundation whatsoever for this alleged causal connection between the manipulation and the stroke. I hope that answers it. I could go on forever. As you know, I'm pretty passionate about these topics, but I don't want to take more time than appropriate.
That's one of the things, John, that has been an honor to work with you as a result of, because, you know, it's one thing for us chiropractors to preach to chiropractors how hard it is to actually have a causation rather than an association with these stroke incidents. But here you are, a researching attorney that becomes passionate based on the findings that you've had. And that's really refreshing, and it really helps someone like myself want to keep chugging along and helping more and more of the doctors to help more people, because you had no horse in this race, and you simply are sharing information based on what you have found. And I really appreciate that. So, you know, that's helpful. And I want to go back to Bill because, you know, again, all of this still comes down to the communication. And, you know, I know, Bill, we've spoken about the fact that, you know, the stroke question from patients when it does come up isn't always what it seems to be. And, you know, there may be a left brain answer, maybe a right brain. Can you share a little bit about that with us based on, you know, Dr. Murkowski's response as well?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that happens frequently is that we get to a seminar, get some facts and figures, we've got some evidence to prove the safety of chiropractic, and it's so easy and tempting to begin to vomit forth those numbers when in fact you are speaking analytically to a person who's expressed an emotional problem, and usually that doesn't work too well. So the first ground of being, besides having a great deal of comfort with the subject, is to recognize that you want to be sure that you're answering the right question. And if the patient is coming from this from an emotional point of view, it's crucial that you respond in a softer tone. But I think even more importantly than that is to have a body language that shows complete assurance and confidence. And I think, to have the notion of having to defend chiropractic while you're on a treadmill is breathtaking at face value. But I think what happens is that most chiropractors get this question very, very infrequently, and when they do, they immediately swing into defensive land. So if I had some advice, it would be, number one, internalize the safety of this. And number two, frequently role play. From time to time, as you're walking down the hallway, have your CAs, pose a question about stroke or, safety concerns, so that you have that literally at your fingertips, and your body doesn't tense up. You don't start getting an emotional response that actually communicates far more loudly than the words that you would use.
I like that because, even with, when we teach the utilization of our informed consent, with the packet that we offer up to the doctors, the whole ending of the packet is a summary of all the research, the current literature that's out there supporting what we do. And I think that, Bill, that's really a home run because it's something that I like to talk about as well. Rather than being defensive, part of the reason that we give the doctors all of this information is because we want them to read it, learn it, understand it, and therefore own it. So that when this topic does come up, a doctor can offer this information from an educational point of view rather than from a defensive posture like you're referring to. And I think that's really important to highlight. So thanks for that. And I want to go back to Dr. Clum. Dr. Clum, I don't even know what to say sometimes. Not many people that I have respect for their intellect and knowledge on a lot of subjects, and that's why you were there when we created ChiroSecure. You've been, a ally and help to us in testifying and everything else. When we're talking about, the doctor's communication with strokes, as you know, because you helped with it on the informed consent that we're recommending, we compare the stroke issue to patients dying at a rate of 104 per million from a simple aspirin, or what appears to be a simple aspirin. So on the surface, we know, just as John indicated, that chiropractic is so safe and the risk is so minimal, even though that association is going to still exist, because as you've taught so many times, no matter what, there's going to be a certain number of people, I think it's 279 chiropractors, will receive a patient in their office that winds up with a dissection, whether they've adjusted them or not. We have a claim currently of a patient that was in a waiting room filling out paperwork. The staff noticed that the patient wasn't doing okay, had the doctor come out, she instantly calls 911, the patient dies in the hospital. And who are they suing? The chiropractor, because the hospital assumed that they wound up with a stroke because of something that the chiropractor did when the chiropractor never even got to examine the patient, let alone adjust them. So this misconception is definitely out there, and you've been instrumental in communicating this to the doctors. How would you add to that conversation?
Well, thanks, Stu. The first thing I would say is to carry off a little bit of what Ken said and what Bill said is, first of all, the doctor's got to have the facts. You know, the time to prepare yourself, to study, to learn, to get everything in place that you need to have in place is not when you've got a problem on your desk or you've got an issue with a patient. It's today. It's this moment right now. So this is important in our world. In the scheme of things, clearly it's an association issue, but it's the most significant association that happens in relationship to what we do. So it's incumbent upon the docs to have a command of the data, and to have a command of the information, to be current with it, first of all. That's their job. It's also their job, in terms of appreciating what's going on, to get a handle on themselves, the doc to get a handle on themselves. One of the realities is, and you just made reference to it, Stu, is that complications to our care are very, very rare. And unlike our colleagues in medicine, who have problems with every script they write, with every surgical procedure they perform, with every administration of anesthesia, there are risks that far exceed anything that we do in our offices. So in their world, they are far more prepared to deal with the ambiguities of those circumstances than we are. And as a result, we wind up, as was said earlier, getting very defensive very quickly, and there is no need to be. The doc needs to ratchet it down and to put the discussion in context, as Ken made reference to a few minutes ago in his experience. We've all had that, and you can amp that up with, just as Bill said, with your voice, with your posture, with your attitude, with how you snarl your lip at the thought of it, or you can ratchet it down to the facts of the situation and putting it in context of the association matter that John's talked about and that Bill talked about, and having the doctor get a good grip of themselves in this process. And then finally, when it comes to the patient, and you made reference to the data about X number of incidences of this with a drug or an aspirin, for example, so on, versus another. If a person has a particular problem, all the meaning of that goes out the window. That's the analytical stuff that Bill's talking about. And if I had a problem with the knee surgery, or Ken had a problem with the cardiac surgery he went to, it's an N of 1. There's only one patient that matters at that moment, and that's me. And that's the perspective that we need to make sure that doc comes back to, is that forget your millions of data points, forget your statistical analysis, forget your statistical significance considerations. The bottom line is it's an N of 1, and that 1 may be sitting in front of you, have a very legitimate question, and you need to have the ability emotionally and intellectually and clinically to provide that answer. And it requires you to do your homework on the front end to make sure you've got a good handle on the current facts that John talked about and the data he talked about. You got to make sure you've done your job clinically, as Ken talked about, and then you've got to make sure you do your job and relate and answer the question that's in front of you. If it's an analytical question, give an analytical answer. If it's an emotional question, respond to the emotion and then add whatever is necessary around it to support that and go from there. So the doc has an important set of responsibilities in this that go way beyond anything to do with the adjustment or anything of the nature, and it's all in this world that's external to all of that, but imposes upon that moment and that circumstance. I hope that makes sense.
Totally makes sense and appreciated. And before I go back to Dr. Murkowski, I want to come back to John for a second, because something that I indicated about the risk of aspirin compared to a cervical adjustment, but there's many other risk factors in the healthcare industry, certainly medicine specifically. And when we look at that, I remember when we were originally talking about the informed consent and should you have stroke in there? If so, how should you have it in there? Because the incidence is so low that it doesn't even reach the statistical rate that you should even need to inform somebody. And I remember you talking about buying a can of paint, and it's one of the risk factors. Painting a ceiling, someone can wind up with a dissection. So you don't go and sign off on an informed consent for that. But can you talk about a little bit of the risk factors when it comes to chiropractic versus traditional risk factors that people think about when they're watching TV and seeing TV ads nonstop talking about this will create a vehicle for you to want to commit suicide, or you'll just die from the medication, but that's just a side effect, let alone what happens in an operating room or in a physician's office. Can you touch on that a little bit for us?
Certainly, and these topics are intriguing because as we investigated the nature of informed consent, one thing came to the fore immediately, and that is the purpose of the document is to provide information that would help an individual assess risk. That is why typically information that's a part of an informed consent deals with risks that's quantifiable within percentages. When you undergo anesthesia, there may be a 1 in 100 chance that you're going to have an adverse event. There may be a 10% chance of an adverse side effect from taking a drug. But what occurred to us as we further developed this concept was, does it make any sense? Does it help a person make a decision if you say that there's a 1 in 5 million chance? Is that even information that should be reasonably a part of making the decision? If someone told you that going outside creates a 1 in 5 million chance of getting hit by lightning, or there's a 1 in 5 million chance of you, as you're walking through the park, a tree's going to fall and kill you, I mean, is that something, is that information that helps person in their daily lives make reasonable decisions? In other words, there are risks which are so rare and so far out in the spectrum of percentages that that information really is not an aid to the individual trying to decide whether to move forward in a risk-benefit analysis. Another way to explain it, if the risk is so remote and there's real benefit, does that risk become, or should it become, a part of information you receive before you make the election? And that's the direction from my third-party position outside the practice that came to me immediately. And it's one that I developed with Dr. Cassidy when discussing his study with him, and that he indeed embraced, and that argument was a part of his presentation to the Connecticut board that ultimately concluded independently that chiropractors are not required to provide or give informed consent in regard to stroke in Connecticut. So that idea, that concept is shared by others and has indeed been adopted. What you ultimately intend to provide to individuals making a decision about whether to accept a therapy or treatment is information that helps them make a decision by providing to them risks that quantify to a point that require them to pause and consider. That's the conclusion we reached.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. I do want to go back to Dr. Murkowski, though, because, Ken, you talked a little earlier about the documentation from the doctor's perspective, and you mentioned a number of things that should be part of that in the initial examination, consultation time. And one of the things that you mentioned was the medications that the patients are on. And that is one thing that we've highlighted quite a bit here because some of the medications are directly related to the health of the vessels. And we've concluded that you cannot cause a dissection in a patient that has a healthy vessel. But some of these risk factors are medications. And how do you teach the doctors to address that in their paperwork, in their consultation, maybe even in follow-ups, because people are always updating medications that they're on?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, what I normally say in all the seminars is when a patient comes in and they start saying that they're on medications, again, we want to show our concern. So what we do is say, please bring all your medications with you the next time. And the reason we do that is that they could tell, and many patients carry their little medications in their pocket or purse wrapped up in a Kleenex or a tissue, but we want to see the exact medications in the containers they come, because you could have one medication made by 3 different companies with 3 different reactions. So we want to take down all the medications. We want to know what the adverse reactions are, and we normally give the patient then a printout of what the adverse reactions are to, again, show them that we're concerned. The other thing is so many doctors today are into wellness and nutritional situations, and they have to understand that some of the nutritional products that they may recommend are contraindicated to some of the medications. So again, we have to, again, teach the doctors that they have to understand with knowledge what those particular things are. In other words, the nutritional aspects interacting with the medications. So again, it's based on documentation, but I think to dovetail on what Mr. Esteb said is, and I try to do it in a simpler way, is to know your audience. In other words, if you're talking to doctors, obviously you want to give them statistics. If you're going to be talking to patients, you want to show them concern. If you're in a public setting and you get asked these questions, then you have to make it and understand that they're asking because normally they've had a personal experience or somebody in their family, so you have to be cognizant of why they're asking the question. So there's so many different facets, I call it turning the magic prism, that again we want to address those. But in the office, if and the other thing too, you brought up a very interesting point, Stu, was that patients change medications rapidly. So what we try to teach in the seminars, on every visit, we want to ask every patient the same basic questions. Have you had any falls, accident, changes in conditions, or new medications? If they say yes to any of those 4 things, we want to make sure the doctor documents those properly in the file, because again, it's not so much the adjustment like Dr. Clum said, but it's also the procedures leading up to that, and you have to make a reasonable effort to show that you're making a concerned effort to find out what's going on.
Thank you, Ken. And Bill, I want to come back to you, because all of the other presenters keep referring back to you about how to communicate to the patients. But I want to take it in a different direction. You see, in chiropractic, we have another phenomenon, and that is we love to see ourselves on the internet, on YouTube, out at the public fair, adjusting people. We put up pictures of us with someone's head in our hands, or on YouTube, an actual adjustment, or we're going to show everybody in the community how we adjust somebody at a fair, sometimes without as much information as perhaps we would like to see happen. But that in and of itself, to me, seems kind of scary, as you were talking about at the very beginning today, about the patient apprehension. And are we adding to that by being so self-serving, thinking that we're doing a good thing by putting these pictures out there and people will think we're great, but at the same time you don't see gynecologists putting out YouTube videos of them and their patients, or prospective patients, or even a dentist or anyone else. It really seems to be a chiropractic thing. How do you see that helping, hurting, or any advice?
Well, this is something that actually shows up pretty frequently in my life through my sister company, Perfect Patients. And, we look after, thousands of chiropractors' websites around the world. One of our guidelines for shooting photography in a chiropractic setting is that we never show a cervical adjustment unless that's the only thing that you do. And if you are showing a cervical adjustment, the patient must be smiling. Because of what that communicates in terms of confidence and safety and all the rest of it. If you use other techniques or adjust in other portions of the spine, we recommend a posterior thoracic, just because that seems to look the safest of all of the types of adjustments. So I think you can do yourself quite a bit of harm by exposing your adjusting techniques to the to the layperson who may not be available or even understand what's going on. I have been in countless in-office consultations where I've watched patients get adjusted, and frankly, it was rather violent, and I knew what was going on. So you want to be real careful about what you're showing off on your website as well as in public.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying about, going into someone's office and it looks like a violent thrust. Some of the high velocity techniques, without the understanding, just watching, would appear that way and could be scary. So, Dr. Clum, you taught me spinal anatomy, and so you have a perspective on this as well, in terms of the doctors being out there, because I want to be specific. Do you think that this has any significance in the conversation that we're having? Because a lot of this does show up on the internet, and that's where people are looking and finding negative experiences with chiropractic at the same time.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a very good point, Stu, because there is a point of diminishing return where a degree of casualness can be comforting, and then at a point where a degree of casualness can be disconcerting. And the kind of experiences that you're talking about, I think, have crossed that line into the disconcerting side of the discussion. And frankly, we are still learning, we as chiropractors and we as people of our age and time are still learning about the internet, how it works, what its consequences are, and so on. And we need to think for the long haul, and by long haul I mean forever. Once it's on the internet, it's there forever, and there is no take back moment. There's no redact moment that you can click a button and it all goes away. So be very thoughtful what you put on the net. The perspective I held when I was at the college, and I hold to this day, is that which can be misunderstood will be misunderstood in the most inappropriate way at the most inappropriate time. Now, if whatever you put on the internet through that discussion and you're still comfortable with it, then I would say go ahead. And be honest with yourself. The idea that the kinds of things that you're talking about, are they illegal? Probably not. Are they immoral? Probably not. Are they inappropriate? That's a different standard. Could very well be. And people have a tendency to get, like we said before, this is something we do all the time. This is something, in terms of adjusting, it's something we see the value of, and we get so excited about what it could do for people that we lose perspective to the society at large, and we wind up, using things inappropriately. There's a time when less is more, and in this discussion, I think less is more, big time.
Thank you. And, John, again, you come from a different perspective. You haven't been involved in the chiropractic world until the last, couple of years, getting into the research part of it. And I guess what I'd love to hear from you is, what are your thoughts when, in terms of how can the chiropractor, the individual chiropractor, help their own cause, in a sense, with the public perception when it comes to strokes and chiropractic?
Well, I agree with Dr. Clum's comments, and it's almost to the point where it parallels the information I give to my team, and to my clients. Before you send anything out, imagine it blown up on a poster and shown to a jury. And if you're comfortable with the jury looking at that and considering that, then you should be comfortable with communicating that. And it's a tough standard. I can say that as I began learning this subject, I turned to Dr. Clum's lectures and his PowerPoint slides, and I gained a lot of very, very useful information. And to those practicing, what he has done and what others competent in the field have done is invaluable, because it represents an accurate assessment and review. And if that exists and you can reference that, why try to create something that is not tested by time and has not been scrutinized previously? Why not just embrace that as the best product for that communication?
And Dr. Ken, a final thought from you on, utilizing your years of experience in these types of claims. What can you offer up to the doctor to be aware of in their communication, whether it be one-on-one with a patient or on a treadmill with 8 people around them, or doing a lecture to a group of people? How would you encourage the doctors to get their message out in terms of the safety and efficacy of chiropractic, which is what we've stood upon for so many years, which is why we still flourish as a profession?
Well, I think a couple of things. I'd like to, again, go over what Dr. Clum said earlier, and also what Mr. Salvucci said. Like, picture what's going to happen if something does go wrong. Again, there's always black, white, 2 edges to every sword. I don't care how flat the pancake is, there's still 2 sides. Many doctors are so busy that they don't even keep up with their changes on their websites. And since so many people today have their websites managed for them, and they don't even know what's on the website, what they're saying. So if your website is automatically saying that, number one, you're the best office, you're the safest office, and then you promise all these procedures to a new patient, and you go into that office and these procedures aren't done, that's going to get a person to start thinking. So again, the doctor today, even though how busy he or she is, has to be also taking responsibility for all the things that they do from a public relations point of view. I think the comment, whoever made the comment, is that we don't see gynecologists doing things or whatever. My concern is that chiropractors always want to give love and service. They forget there is the safety business aspect. So I say there's two hands. The right hand is love and service, but the left hand is the legal and the business. So monitoring what you put out in your publications, in your in-office newsletters, on your website. You constantly have to be aware of how you're communicating and the different audiences there are. So I would definitely caution the doctors to make sure they know what's being put out under the clinic's name or their name. I would also have, like Mr. Salvucci said, I believe, or someone said, have your staff ask you a question. Anything that I tell doctors to put out, I say, if you're going to write your Yellow Pages ad, most doctors write their Yellow Pages ads for other doctors, like my ad's bigger than yours. I say take that Yellow Pages ad, show it to your staff, show it to your family, and see what they have to say, because they'll approach it from a different perspective. So between your Yellow Pages ads, your website, your office newsletters, how you present, I always tell doctors to have a 1-minute explanation of chiropractic, because you're going to be asked in maybe a line at a grocery store, a 5-minute explanation of chiropractic, because you're going to be asked that at a cocktail party, and then you give your 30-minute explanation if you're going to a public setting where you're giving a presentation. So I call it my 1, 5, and 30, and then know your media that you're using.
Thank you. I want to just go around and ask for a final thought from each of you, starting with you, Bill. Whether we hear it on an everyday basis from the public or not, it is out there about strokes and chiropractic, and we will see more articles show up. We'll see more media presentations about it at some point. I was always taught better to address it on the front end so that people don't just disappear and you never know why they disappeared. If you address it, and as you said, doing it from a good communication perspective, not in an emotional point of view or a defensive posture, you're going to be so much further ahead. Can you give us a final word on any thoughts to leave the viewers with?
Well, I think what we're really talking about here is being prepared. And that's what a program like this, of course, is designed to do. But being prepared so that you are not feeling like you're in an ambushed situation, very, very helpful. But I think this is part of a much larger conversation, which could be summarized with the idea of expectation management, if you will. This is about setting up the appropriate expectations at the very beginning of the relationship, volunteering information so that you tell them what's going to happen, you do it, you told them what's happened. It is the fundamental way of building trust, and that's really what this conversation is all about.
That's excellent. And Dr. Clum, any final thoughts on this from you?
Thanks, Stu. The first is you can't disprove a negative, so don't try. The second consideration is while you can't disprove the negative, you can augment the discussion with the facts that Bill talked about. So you've got to be prepared, you've got to do your homework, you've got to be ready to be involved in the dialogue and the discussion. I frankly do see it as you do, Stu, and that the idea that people's imaginations are far greater than reality. So let's not let them run their imaginations run away. Let's give them the data as we understand it. The good news for the practicing chiropractor and for the patient is there's good, solid data that has been replicated numerous times by different researchers with different populations coming to the exact same conclusions. Or in fact, that's not actually accurate to say the exact same conclusions, coming to stronger conclusions each time the data is analyzed. So the more it's looked at, the better it gets. So the real closing comment for the chiropractor is, do your homework, be practical in relationship to dealing with people. Bill's, one of the things that I've taken from this discussion today is Bill's question is, listen to the question, answer the question being asked, and then add whatever information you need around it and go from there. And if we'll do that, I think we can ratchet down the rhetoric about this. The internet's going to be there forever. People can click chiropractic and stroke and find out all sorts of information that they want to find out. You and I have to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff for them and give them the real deal in this discussion, and do it in an honest, candid, and straightforward fashion is the ideal way to try and do it. And I hope this discussion accrues to that end for anybody who's listening.
Thank you. And Dr. Ken, is there any final thoughts you want to share with the audience today?
No, I think that basically everybody has really done a very good job covering all the different aspects. Again, I think the service that you provide to all your clients with ChiroSecure and the information that you keep updating is invaluable. I would suggest that basically the different things that we discussed today, if you could maybe put that out in subtopic form. In other words, maybe a little notation about keeping up with your internet changes on your website, or like Dr. Clum said, keeping abreast of that. The one thing I learned a long time ago is make lemonade out of lemons, and you basically want to take any negative and make it a positive as soon as you can. So to the doctors in the field, again, show your love and consideration. There are people that come into your office that are analytical. There are people that come in your office that are more verbal. You know that more than 80% of communication is basically how you say things and how you present yourself in body language. So again, if the doctor is cognizant of that and they have the statistics to back them up, try to make it as personal as possible.
Thanks, Dr. Murkowski. And John, you've come to us as a partner with AIG, and I really appreciate that partnership and what you've brought to the table. It's been really terrific on behalf of our ChiroSecure insureds, but it goes way beyond that, because the information that you brought, I know other companies have already started utilizing and looking at, because no one has done this research before we teamed up to get this done. So when it comes to the chiropractic profession and the stroke issue, is there anything final you want to add into the conversation for our viewers to take away from this?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you and your team. Very dedicated people and very responsive. It's been a joy. For fear of being somewhat repetitive, the takeaway, I believe, and the one that should be focused upon, is the fact that vertebral arterial dissections may, in some cases, evolve into a stroke. However, the overwhelming scientific evidence is that cervical manipulation performed by chiropractors doesn't cause the dissection. However, there are about 80 trivial traumas that we've accumulated and identified in the case reports being the weakest form of scientific evidence, but 80 trivial traumas that have been temporarily associated with stroke. Yet no one is going to argue, and no one has argued in the literature, that yoga class or playing tennis or painting a ceiling, while acknowledged as being preceding a stroke, causes a dissection. And the trivial traumas that have been temporarily associated with stroke are well explained by Dr. Clum in his lectures, and indeed, I think, further support the argument that we must stick to the timeline. The dissection occurs. That generates the pain. That's why the patient is in your office. And the potential for a stroke of that patient is the same as the potential for a stroke of the patient that goes to a primary care physician with the same neck complaints. So that course is going to evolve, and nothing that we know attributes, from a causative standpoint, the therapies provided by the chiropractor as contributing or causing the ultimate stroke.
Thanks, John. And, you know, in closing, I'd like to say that I just hope that you feel that the information we presented today gives you many ideas on how to deal with the stroke issue in the public domain. As you can imagine, this needs to be what I would consider, and I think one of our presenters said, an ongoing dialogue. And it's my promise to you that ChiroSecure will always be the leader in dealing with these kinds of issues. I'd like to thank all of our guests today, and I ask all of you that have attended this to share this information with your peers. So for ChiroSecure, I'm Dr. Stu Hoffman. As we said during the show, this needs to be an ongoing dialogue. Although no one likes to talk about it, the number of chiropractors brought up for malpractice is increasing. It's time to stop chiropractors from being brought in front of a jury accused of something that there is no evidence they have committed. Knowing that the stakes are so high, ChiroSecure remains dedicated to take on this task. So now the question is, what can you do? It's really very simple. If you are already a ChiroSecure client, a portion of your premium automatically gets used not only to fund research we currently support, but also to fund this huge task at hand. The only thing we ask you to do is share this message. If you are not already a ChiroSecure client, and you want to stop chiropractors from being accused of causing arterial dissections when there is no evidence to support it, then give us the opportunity to become your malpractice provider. We will provide you with the best rate and the best coverage available, along with the satisfaction of being able to say that you are now a participant in the most important mission to change the public's perception of chiropractic now and for the future. I'm Dr. Stu Hoffman. Are you ready?